Morning light streamed through the blinds of the spacious kitchen, painting the white countertops a warm hue. Susan Brooks methodically chopped vegetables for the omelet, each movement of the knife reflecting years of practiced precision. 52 years of life had taught her that control was the key to peace of mind, especially lately. "Ashley," she called out without lifting her head from the cutting board. "Breakfast in 5 minutes." Silence was her answer. Susan sighed, set the knife aside, and wiped her hands on her apron. The hands of the clock showed 7:30 in the morning, later than usual for their family breakfast. Walking up to the second floor, she stopped in front of the door to her daughter's room. The door was adorned with stickers of musical groups and a "Do Not Enter" warning sign. Susan ignored such trivialities. She knocked 3 times, paused, and opened the door. "Are you deaf? I've been calling you for—" The words stuck in her throat. Ashley sat in front of the mirror, dressed for school, a short top that exposed her stomach, dark jeans ripped in several places, and eyes lined with dark, overly grown-up makeup. "Good morning, Mom," Ashley said, not taking her eyes off the mirror. "I'm not hungry." Susan felt anger boiling up inside her. 18. She remembered herself at that age. She remembered too well, and that was why. "Get changed," she said in a steady voice, "and come down for breakfast. Richard's leaving today, and we're having breakfast together." Ashley rolled her eyes, but Susan closed the door without waiting for a response. Control. Stay in control. Richard Brooks was finishing packing his suitcase when she returned to their bedroom. A tall, trim man with barely noticeable gray on his temples, he was 10 years younger than Susan, a fact the roommates never lost sight of in their whispers. "She's in her own world again," Susan said, adjusting the already perfectly made bed. Richard smiled as he closed the suitcase. "Let her breathe, Sue. All teenagers go through this. She's 18. It's time to grow up. Or it's time for her parents to realize she's an adult," Richard said softly, walking over to his wife and hugging her from behind. "I'm going to miss you both. 3 days will go by quickly." Susan turned in his arms, gazing into her husband's face. 5 years of marriage after the death of her first husband. 5 years that had given her a second chance. She wanted to believe she deserved one. "Call me when you get to Chicago," she said, kissing his cheek. Breakfast passed in tense silence. Ashley changed into a more modest sweater, but left her makeup on. She barely touched her food, constantly checking her phone under the table. "You have a history test today, remember?" Susan asked, trying to start a conversation. "No," Ashley answered briefly. "I can drive you on the way to the airport," Richard offered. Ashley looked up from the phone, her face suddenly animated. "Thanks, but I've made arrangements with Jason. He's picking me up." Susan tensed. "Jason? Who's that?" "A classmate." Ashley shrugged. "He's on his way." "I don't remember any Jason," Susan insisted. "It's that boy who—" "It's just a classmate!" Ashley stood up abruptly from the table. "God, why do you always have to control everything?" Richard put his hand on his wife's shoulder, squeezing gently. "Ashley, phone on the table for the rest of breakfast, please. Sue, let's trust our girl, okay?" Ashley reluctantly put the phone down. Susan forced herself to relax. Richard always knew how to lighten the mood. It was one of the talents she appreciated him for. When Richard left for the airport and Ashley left for school with Jason, Susan was alone in the empty house. She mechanically cleaned the kitchen, washed the dishes, wiped down the countertops to a shine. Then she went upstairs to make Ashley's bed. Her daughter's room always gave her mixed feelings. Rebel posters neighbored the children's toys Ashley refused to throw away. Sketchbooks were scattered everywhere. Her daughter had inherited a talent for drawing from her birth father. Susan took a seat on the bed, picking up one of the sketchbooks. Flipping through a few pages of landscapes and still lifes, she froze. The most recent drawings showed a male profile, so detailed that there was no doubt about it. Richard. But there was something intimate about the sketches, something that made Susan's heart ache. She put the sketchbook aside and noticed the drawer of her bedside table pulled out. Inside was an envelope. Susan knew she shouldn't. But wasn't it her duty to protect her daughter? She pulled out the envelope and opened it. A concert ticket. 2 tickets to a concert in Kansas City, this weekend, when Richard's traveling on business. when he should be in Chicago. Her hands trembled. No, it's a coincidence. It had to be a coincidence. The phone call snapped her out of her maze of thoughts. Susan flinched, hastily returned the tickets to the envelope and the envelope to the drawer. The number was undetectable. Hello? Mrs. Brooks? The man's voice sounded formal. This is Detective Warren Bishop from the Crime Scene Investigation Unit. We received an anonymous call regarding your daughter. Detective Warren Bishop hated Mondays. 20 years on the force, and the statistics didn't lie. Mondays always brought more trouble. Today was no exception. It's a convincing theory, but it's not much evidence. Bishop closed the file on the theft case. We need witnesses, Mark. Without them, this won't hold up in court. The young officer nodded, frustrated as he gathered up his papers. I'll talk to the mall security guards again. Bishop leaned back in his chair, looking at the crime scene photos. After all these years, he'd learned to see details that others missed, the shadows in the background, the position of objects, the expression of faces on surveillance cameras. People have always left traces of their stories, you just have to know how to read them. The phone on the desk rang. Bishop picked it up. Detective Bishop. The voice on the other end was muffled, perhaps deliberately altered. Something's going on in the Brooks family. You might want to check on the girl. Ashley Brooks, Oakwood High School. Her stepfather. Who's talking? Bishop asked sharply, but the line was already cut. He hung up and thought. Anonymous calls were commonplace. Most of them idle, sometimes malicious jokes, but sometimes they saved lives. Bishop opened the database and typed in Brooks, Ashley. The system showed the address, school, basic family information. Stepfather, Richard Brooks, 42, businessman, owner of a construction company. Mother, Susan Brooks, 52, homemaker. No criminal record, no police calls to home address. On the surface, a perfect family. But in his 20 years on the job, Bishop knew there are no perfect families. He dialed Susan Brooks' number. Perhaps a simple conversation would clarify the situation, or at least give him an idea of whether to dig deeper. Mrs. Brooks, this is Detective Warren Bishop from Crime Stoppers. We received an anonymous call regarding your daughter. There was a pause, during which Bishop could only hear a pause in his breathing. My daughter? The woman finally answered. Her voice sounded strained. Was something wrong? Nothing specific, ma'am, just a routine checkup. Perhaps I could stop by your place today for a brief conversation? Another pause, longer than it took for a simple answer. Of course, she said at last. What time is convenient for you? I'll be at your place in about an hour if that works for you. Yes, it would. As he hung up, Bishop made a note in his notebook. Something in Susan Brooks's voice made him uneasy. Perhaps the usual parental alarm when the police called, or perhaps something else. He grabbed his jacket and headed for the exit. After all, something unexpected always happens on Monday. The Brooks family home looked immaculate. Manicured lawn, freshly painted window frames, ornamental shrubs trimmed with surgical precision. Detective Bishop parked his shabby sedan by the sidewalk, noting the contrast between his car and the shiny SUV in the driveway. At the call, the door opened almost instantly. Susan Brooks looked understatedly elegant. A navy blue cardigan, straight pants, minimal makeup. Only her red eyes showed her condition. Detective Bishop? She extended her hand for a handshake. Come in, please. Bishop stepped into the spacious living room, noting the order in everything from the arrangement of the decorative pillows to the magazines aligned in a perfect stack on the coffee table. Thank you for agreeing to meet, Mrs. Brooks, Bishop began, accepting the offered chair. As I mentioned on the phone, we received an anonymous call regarding your daughter. Ashley, Susan nodded, her hands clasped in her lap. What exactly were you told? Bishop noted the tension in her posture, the way her knuckles turned white. The caller was brief, just expressed concern about a family situation. Mentioned your husband. Bishop watched the woman's reaction carefully. Is he home? Richard's on a business trip to Chicago. He left this morning, Susan answered, and something flashed in her eyes. He'll be back in 3 days. And Ashley? At school. She had a history test today, and then she was going to a friend's house, Susan said evenly, but her eyes flicked to the clock on the wall. She's usually back in time for dinner. Bishop paused, pulling out a notebook. Mrs. Brooks, perhaps I should ask a few personal questions. How long have you been married to Richard? 5 years, she answered. My first husband, Ashley's father, died in a car accident when she was 13. How does Ashley get along with her stepfather? Susan tensed, but quickly pulled herself together. Like any teenager. There are disagreements, but overall, fine. And with you? What do you mean? There's a note of defensiveness in her voice. Adolescence is complicated, especially mother-daughter relationships, Bishop explained gently. Susan sighed, relaxing her shoulders. We've had difficult months. Ashley's growing up, looking for freedom. I may not always be ready to give that freedom. She tried to smile. You know, the usual teenage problems. Bishop nodded, taking notes. Do you mind if I talk to Ashley? Susan visibly tensed. Why? If someone called with false accusations. It's standard procedure, Mrs. Brooks. Nothing out of the ordinary, Bishop assured her. Perhaps you could call her right now? See when she plans to return? Susan took out her cell phone and dialed a number. After a few beeps, it went to voicemail. She didn't answer. Probably still in class, she said, but her voice trembled. Maybe I could visit the school, Bishop suggested, watching the woman's reaction carefully. Susan stood up abruptly. Do you think something's wrong? Her tone changed to something akin to panic. Why do you insist on seeing her? Bishop came up next, remaining calm. Mrs. Brooks, I'm just doing my job. Anonymous calls often turn out to be false alarms, but we have a duty to check. Susan's phone rang, interrupting the conversation. She glanced at the screen and turned visibly pale. It's the school, she whispered, answering the call. Yes? Yes, this is Mrs. Brooks. What? No, I don't. Okay, I understand. Thank you. She put the phone down slowly, looking at Bishop with a strange, absent look. Ashley wasn't at school today, at all. They're calling to ask why I didn't alert them to her absence. By late afternoon, the Brooks house had become a makeshift command center. Officers interviewed neighbors, technicians checked phone records, and Bishop sat across from Susan in the living room, asking one question after another. You said you saw Ashley leave for school, with someone named Jason? Susan nodded, her hands trembling around the cup of untouched tea. Yes, a classmate. He was supposed to give her a ride to school. We checked the student rosters. There's no one in Ashley's class named Jason, Bishop said softly. Susan looked up at him. That's impossible, she said. Mrs. Brooks, Bishop interrupted her. We need to know the truth. Did you really see Ashley leave with this Jason? Susan lowered her eyes. I saw her get into the car. A dark sedan. I didn't get a good look at the driver. Her voice shook. I was upset about our conversation this morning, so I didn't go to see her off like I usually did. Bishop made a note. We've already canvassed her closest friends. No one's seen her today. Last contact was Melissa Clark on the phone last night. Did Ashley mention plans for the weekend? No, Susan answered too quickly. I mean, she might have said something about a concert, but nothing specific. Bishop noted that reaction. Outside, there was the sound of a car pulling up, the door slamming shut. A moment later, the door swung open, and a tall, middle-aged man literally flew into the living room. Sue, I came as soon as I heard. He stopped when he saw the police. What's going on? Where's Ashley? Mr. Brooks, I presume? Bishop stood up, extending his hand. Detective Warren Bishop, we're investigating the disappearance of your stepdaughter. Richard Brooks looked shocked. Disappearance? I thought, I was told she didn't come home from school. Ashley wasn't at school today, Bishop explained. As far as we understand, she got into a car with an unknown person this morning and hasn't been seen since. Richard turned to his wife. Sue, what's happened? Bishop watched both spouses carefully. Richard's worry seemed genuine, but something about Susan's reaction to his appearance seemed wrong. Mr. Brooks, would you mind if we spoke privately? Bishop suggested. As the officer escorted Richard into the kitchen, Bishop turned to Susan. Mrs. Brooks, are you surprised to see your husband back? You said he was supposed to be in Chicago for 3 days. Susan nodded slowly without raising her eyes. Yes, his business trip. Apparently he's back because of Ashley. Did you call him? No, she hesitated. I guess the school did. They have his contacts. Next door across the street, Bishop sat in the Gardner family's living room. An elderly couple willingly agreed to talk about their neighbors. They moved in about 5 years ago, Mrs. Gardner said, arranging the coffee cups. Right after Susan married Richard. Very nice family. Do you two socialize often? Bishop asked. Mostly on holidays, Mr. Gardner replied. Susan is a little aloof. Richard is more outgoing. And Ashley? The couple looked at each other. She's a good girl, Mrs. Gardner began cautiously. Talented, draws beautifully, but she's been kind of withdrawn lately. Did you ever hear any arguments from their house? More looks exchanged. Teenagers, you know. Mr. Gardner shrugged. We used to hear loud voices, especially in recent months. Between who? Susan and Ashley mostly, Mrs. Gardner replied. Susan, how can I put this? A very strict mother, controlling, and Ashley's a creative person who needs her freedom. And Richard? He's usually a peacemaker, Mrs. Gardner smiled. Always trying to smooth things over. He's a good man. Have you noticed anything unusual in the last few days? Bishop asked, making notes. Mrs. Gardner thought for a moment. Last night. I was walking the dog around 10. I saw Ashley talking to someone in a car on the street corner, a dark sedan like you described. Did you see the driver? No, it was dark, but they talked for a long time, at least 15 minutes. And today, did you see Ashley leave this morning? No, I was at the store. Mrs. Gardner shook her head. But, she hesitated. Anything else? Bishop nudged her. Around noon, I saw Susan taking some bags out to the garage, several times. Seemed odd. She usually does that kind of thing on the weekends. Bishop made a mental note. This could be important. Back at the Brooks house, Bishop found that Richard had organized an impromptu search party. He was on the phone with Ashley's friends, checking her social media with the help of a police officer, and he looked genuinely concerned. Did you find anything? Bishop asked, approaching him. Nothing concrete. Richard shook his head. Her friends were puzzled. The latest social media posts from last night. Nothing out of the ordinary. Mr. Brooks, you mentioned you were in Chicago. Why did you return so quickly? Richard rubbed his temple. I got a call from the school administration. They said Ashley hadn't shown up and Susan wasn't answering her cell phone. I immediately suspected something was wrong and took the first flight back. You didn't try to contact your wife before that? I tried, but she didn't answer. He frowned. I thought maybe they'd gone somewhere together. Sometimes Sue forgets to charge her cell phone. Bishop nodded, making notes. Susan didn't seem like the type of person to forget such things, but he kept that remark to himself. How would you describe the relationship between your wife and Ashley? Richard sighed, glancing around to make sure Susan couldn't hear their conversation. It's complicated. Sue worries a lot about her daughter, sometimes too much. After her first husband died, she's, more anxious, more controlling. And Ashley's growing up, and she needs her space. And your relationship with Ashley? It's good, I think, Richard shrugged. I try to be a friend, not a substitute father. We talk a lot about art and music. I support her hobby of drawing. Bishop looked him straight in the eye. Mr. Brooks, I have to ask, do you and Ashley have any kind of, personal relationship that goes beyond that of a family? Richard recoiled, a look of genuine amazement on his face. What? No, absolutely not. Where did such questions come from? The anonymous call we received indicated a possible, inappropriate relationship. Richard shook his head, his face going pale. That's absurd. I love Ashley like a daughter. I would never cross that line. Bishop watched his reaction, which seemed genuine, but 20 years on the job had taught him that good liars existed. I'm asking everyone, Mr. Brooks, who do you think could have made that call? Richard hesitated for a moment. I don't know. Maybe one of the jealous classmates? Ashley's talented, attractive, or someone who saw us discussing her drawings together and misinterpreted them? That's when the officer walked up to them. Detective, we finished our preliminary sweep of Ashley's room. Found the diary, but the last pages are torn out. Ripped out? Bishop interjected. Yes, sir. Seems recent. Bishop turned to Richard. Were you aware of the diary's existence? No. Ashley values her privacy very much. Bishop nodded and headed for the stairs. Ashley's room looked like a typical teenager's room. Posters, scattered clothes, textbooks. The officer handed him a paperback journal. Indeed, the last few pages had been neatly torn out. "Anything else of interest?" "Found tickets to a concert in Kansas City next weekend," the officer replied. "2 tickets." "2?" Bishop thought for a second. "Who's the other one?" "Unknown, sir. But there are mentions in her phone messages of secret plans for the weekend." Bishop went downstairs, where Susan sat motionless on the couch. She looked exhausted but strangely detached, as if what was happening was distant from her. "Mrs. Brooks, did you know about Ashley's plans for the weekend? The concert in Kansas City?" Her eyes widened for a moment. "No, she didn't say anything." "What about the diary?" "I knew she kept a diary," Susan admitted. "All teenagers do." "Have you ever read it?" Susan hesitated. "No, I respect her privacy." Bishop noticed the slight trembling of her hands. "Mrs. Brooks, I need to ask a direct question. Do you think there might have been, inappropriate relationship?" Susan looked up sharply, her gaze sharp. "Why are you asking?" "It's a routine question in investigations like this." Susan clenched her fists. "No, of course not. Richard is a good man." But something in her tone, in the tension in her shoulders, made Bishop think. "Mrs. Brooks, would you mind if we took a look at the whole house, including the garage and basement?" Susan turned sharply pale. "Why? You've already looked in Ashley's room." "Standard procedure," Bishop replied calmly. "Perhaps she'd left some clues about her plans elsewhere in the house." "You need a warrant," Susan said suddenly firmly. Richard, who had heard the last part of the conversation, walked over to them. "Sue, why do you object? If it will help find Ashley." "No." She stood up, crossing her arms over her chest. "I don't want them going through all our stuff." Bishop watched this exchange carefully. The sudden change in Susan's demeanor was a troubling sign. "Mrs. Brooks, I understand your concern, but time is critical in cases of disappearances. If you insist on a warrant, we can get one, but it will take time." "Sue, for God's sake," Richard exclaimed. "Detective Bishop, look around all you want. We have no secrets." Susan turned even paler, but remained silent. Bishop nodded to the 2 officers, and they headed toward the garage and basement. 5 minutes later, a scream came from the basement. "Detective! You need to see this!" Bishop quickly descended the stairs, Richard following him. In the far corner of the basement, behind racks of gardening tools, the officers found a large plastic container. The lid was loose. One of the officers carefully lifted the lid and recoiled. Inside, curled up in an unnatural pose, lay the body of Ashley Brooks. The morgue of County Hospital greeted Detective Bishop with sterile silence and the pungent smell of disinfectants. Dr. Naomi Frost, a short woman with a penetrating gaze and graying hair pulled back into a tight bundle, waited for him at the autopsy table. "Detective," she nodded a greeting. "I just finished my preliminary examination." Bishop walked over to the table where Ashley Brooks's body lay under a white sheet. Despite 20 years on the job, moments like this never got easier. "What can you tell me, Doc?" Frost gently pulled back the sheet, exposing the girl's pale face. Even in death, her features retained a fragile beauty that now seemed especially tragic. Death occurred sometime between 8 and 10 o'clock in the morning. Cause: multiple injuries to the head and neck. She pointed to the prominent bruises. The nature of the injuries suggests that the blows were delivered with great force, in a state of extreme agitation. Classic case of a crime of passion. Murder weapon? Judging by the shape of the wounds, something heavy with a flat surface. Could be a vase or a statue. She also has 2 broken fingers on her right hand. Defensive injuries. She was trying to cover herself from the blows. Bishop took a deep breath, suppressing a wave of anger. 18 years old. She's got her whole life ahead of her. Any sign of sexual assault? No. Frost shook her head. No signs. But the analysis shows she was sexually active for the last 24 hours before she died. Voluntary. Bishop nodded thoughtfully. Anything else? There's traces of skin under the fingernails, and we're running DNA. Should have the results by tomorrow morning, Frost said quietly. Detective, the nature of the injuries indicate a personal connection to the attacker. This isn't just a murder. It's an emotional outburst aimed directly at the victim's face. It's usually committed by someone close to the victim. I know, Bishop nodded grimly. Susan Brooks is in custody and her husband is testifying. They found a broken statue in the house with traces of blood on it. It appears to be the murder weapon. That's odd, Frost said. Usually in situations like this, they call the police, try to cover their tracks. But hiding a body in your own basement, when you know that sooner or later it will be found. Panic, Bishop shrugged, or something more complicated. I've yet to figure it out. In the interrogation room of the police department, Richard Brooks looked haggard. His eyes were red from crying, his hands shaking as he picked up a glass of water. I still can't believe it, he said quietly. Ashley and Susan. How could this have happened? Bishop sat down across from him, spreading out a file folder in front of him. Mr. Brooks, we need to get some details straight. You say you left for the airport this morning to fly to Chicago? Yes, Richard nodded. My flight was at 10:30 in the morning. I left the house around 8. And when did you find out about Ashley's disappearance? About 2 o'clock in the afternoon. I got a call from the school saying they couldn't reach Susan. I immediately suspected something was wrong and took the first flight back. Bishop opened the folder and pulled out a photograph. Recognize it? There was a silver pendant in the shape of an artist's palette encrusted with small stones. Richard went pale. Yes, I gave it to Ashley for her 18th birthday, last month. An expensive gift for a stepdaughter, Bishop said. She's a talented artist, Richard replied defensively. The pendant symbolized support for her hobby. We found several other gifts in her room. A bracelet engraved "To My Muse," designer headphones, professional art supplies. All quite expensive. Richard ran his hand over his face. Look, I make good money, and I wanted to support her talents. Susan has always been frugal in that regard. She didn't think art was a real profession. Bishop nodded, making notes. Mr. Brooks, in examining Ashley's phone, we found numerous messages from you. Some were sent late at night and contained unusual expressions of affection. What do you mean? Richard tensed up. Bishop pulled out the printouts. I can't wait to see your drawings again. Your talent has captivated me as much as your smile. I dream of our next meeting when we can be ourselves without masks. You bring a light into my life that I didn't know before. Richard lowered his head. This looks different than I had envisioned, but there was nothing inappropriate between us. I admired her talent, her spirit. Perhaps I was too enthusiastic, but never. And the tickets to the Kansas City concert? Bishop interrupted him. This weekend, when you were supposed to be in Chicago. Richard froze. I don't know about any tickets. That's odd. Bishop pulled out another document. Because they were purchased with your credit card. Richard looked genuinely surprised. That's impossible. I didn't buy any tickets, unless... He stopped talking, struck by a hunch. Ashley has access to my emergency card. Maybe she used it? And why would she buy 2 tickets if you didn't know anything? Yeah, I don't know. Richard seemed confused. Maybe for a friend? Bishop watched him silently, letting silence fill the room. Then he pulled out another document. Mr. Brooks, we found pages from Ashley's diary, the very ones that were torn out. Richard looked up sharply. Where? In a trash can in your garage. Burned, but partially recoverable. Bishop put on his glasses and began to read. R says we can be together for real soon. After my birthday, we're planning a trip. Just the 2 of us. Mom doesn't know anything and doesn't need to know. She'll never understand our feelings. Richard turned even paler. This was some kind of misunderstanding. Ashley might have been fantasizing teenagers sometimes. Mr. Brooks, Ashley's body was found in the basement of your home. Your wife is in custody. I think it's time to tell the truth. Richard clenched his fists, his knuckles turning white. I swear Ashley and I were not romantically involved. Yes, I cared for her, supported her talents, was perhaps closer than the average stepfather, but never, ever crossed that line. Bishop studied his face, trying to catch signs of lying. Over the years, he'd seen plenty of criminals masterfully concealing the truth. But Richard's reaction seemed genuine. Then how do you explain these tapes? The messages? The gifts? Richard took a deep breath, trying to gather his thoughts. Look, Ashley's life with Susan was complicated. Susan became overly controlling after her first husband died. Ashley was looking for a way out, a way to be independent. I supported her dreams of art because I saw her talent. And yes, perhaps our connection had become too close, but not in the way you're suggesting. He was quiet for a moment, gathering his thoughts. Ashley was talking about going to art school after high school. Susan was against it. I secretly helped Ashley prepare her portfolio, even contacted a few schools on her behalf. Our secret meetings were about that. The trip she wrote about? It was supposed to be a viewing trip to an art academy in New York, not a romantic getaway. Bishop tapped his pen thoughtfully on the table. Why the secrecy? Why not discuss it openly? Richard grinned bitterly. You don't know Susan. She doesn't tolerate disagreement, especially when it comes to Ashley. After her first husband died, she clung to her daughter as the last link to her past, controlling her every move. When I married Susan, I thought I could help, create a healthier atmosphere, but it just got more complicated. Bishop made a note. Richard's story sounded plausible, but it needed verification. We requested surveillance footage from the neighbors. One of them showed Susan coming home around 9 in the morning, even though she claimed she hadn't left the house. Do you have any idea where she might have been? Richard shook his head. I haven't a clue. I'd already left by then. The other tape shows a dark sedan pulling up to your house at 8 in the morning. It's driven by a young man. The camera didn't catch his face, but he's definitely not the Jason Susan was talking about. Ashley comes out of the house, gets in the car. They talk for about 5 minutes, then she gets out and goes back inside. The car drives away. This takes place well after you leave, but before the estimated time of death. Richard looked puzzled. I don't know who it could have been. Bishop scrutinized his reaction. No clue? Ashley's boyfriend, maybe? As far as I know, she didn't have a boyfriend. At least she never introduced anyone to me or Susan. But teenagers. They often keep things like that from their parents. Bishop nodded, closing the folder. Mr. Brooks, I appreciate your candor, but our investigation is ongoing. If you remember anything else, any detail, please report it immediately. In a nearby interview room, Susan Brooks sat motionless, staring at a single point. After the discovery of the body, she did not utter a word, even when her rights were read to her. Her hands, folded on the table, were perfectly manicured, with only traces of caked blood under her fingernails. Bishop came in and sat down across from her. Susan didn't even look up. Mrs. Brooks, he began softly. We found the murder weapon, a bronze statue of a ballerina. Ashley's blood and hair are on it, along with your fingerprints. No response. Dr. Frost did a preliminary examination. Death occurred between 8 o'clock and 10 a.m. Multiple head injuries. That's when you were home alone with Ashley. Susan blinked, but remained silent. We also found torn pages from Ashley's diary. You burned them, but we were able to recover some of the text. Ashley wrote about her feelings for your husband. Something flickered in Susan's eyes at the mention of Richard. Bishop continued, choosing his words carefully. We've spoken to Richard. He claims that there was no romantic relationship between him and Ashley, that he simply encouraged her pursuit of art, helped her prepare for art school. Against your wishes. Susan's lips quivered. They lied to me, she said faintly. Both of them, all the time. Bishop stepped forward. Tell me what happened this morning, Susan. She looked up slowly, tears in her eyes. I found the tickets. 2 tickets to a concert. The weekend, Richard was supposed to be in Chicago. I couldn't believe it. I didn't want to believe it. But then I saw her diary, the way she wrote about him. R understands me like no one else. We'll be together when I graduate. Mom will never understand our feelings. Her voice trembled. I asked her directly after Richard left. At first she denied everything. Then she said she loved him, that they planned to be together, that I was old, controlling, that I was suffocating her, that Richard was giving her a freedom I never gave her. Susan clenched her fists. I remember screaming at her. I grabbed that statue, given to me by my first husband, Ashley's father. I remember the look in her eyes. And then, nothing. When I came to, she was lying on the floor. Blood. There was so much blood. Bishop listened without interrupting. Susan was talking faster and faster, like a dam had burst. I panicked. I wanted to call an ambulance, but I realized it was too late. She wasn't breathing. I didn't know what to do. I wrapped her body in sheets, took her down to the basement. I wanted to pretend that she just left. She ran away. That's what teenagers do, right? She looked up at Bishop, lost in thought. I ripped the pages out of her journal, burned them, wiped the blood off, called the school, told them she was sick. And then you called. Said you got an anonymous call. Who would make that call, Susan? She shook her head. I don't know. Maybe a neighbor. She was walking her dog this morning, might have seen something. Or the guy in the car. What guy? Bishop was alert. I saw it from the window. A dark car pulled up, and Ashley got out to talk to the driver. After Richard left, I didn't see who it was. Do you know what they were talking about? No, I was upstairs making the bed. When I came downstairs, the car was gone and Ashley was back in the house. That's when I asked her about the tickets, about the diary. Bishop thought for a moment. Susan's story matched the videotape and the autopsy results. Mrs. Brooks, have you considered the possibility that Richard and Ashley weren't really romantically involved? That he was simply supporting her pursuits that you didn't approve of? Susan grinned bitterly. You didn't see the way she wrote about him, how she looked at him, how he gave her expensive gifts secretly from me. I know I did. Maybe you saw what you were most afraid of. Bishop asked softly. Losing control of your daughter, losing your husband. Susan froze, her eyes widening at the sudden realization. Yep, I don't know. Ashley said I was always in control, that I don't let her breathe. Her voice shook. Maybe she was right. After Robert died, her father, I was so afraid of losing her too. I held on to her too tightly, and now, tears are streaming down her face. What have I done? My little girl? My little girl? That evening, Bishop sat in his office, going through the Ashley Brooks case files. On the desk were crime scene photos, the coroner's report, message printouts, and recovered diary pages. There was a knock on the door, and Officer Jenkins entered. Detective, we've identified the driver of the dark sedan, Jason Coleman, 21 years old, a student at an art college in Kansas City. He claims he was Ashley's mentor, helping her prepare her portfolio for admission. Bishop raised an eyebrow. A mentor? According to Coleman, Richard Brooks had approached him about 6 months ago when he found out he was a graduate of the very academy Ashley wanted to attend, paid him for counseling. That morning, Ashley asked him to stop by to pick up her latest work for her portfolio. He confirms that he saw her alive around 8:15 that morning. What about the romantic relationship between Ashley and her stepfather? Coleman says Ashley never mentioned anything like that. On the contrary, she often said how grateful she was to Richard for supporting her art, unlike her mother who thought it was a waste of time. Bishop leaned back in his chair, pondering the information. And the concert tickets? Really bought from Richard's card, but Coleman claims Ashley ordered them herself online. The second ticket was for him as a thank you for helping him with his portfolio. Bishop nodded. It seemed to agree with Richard's version. What's going to happen to Susan Brooks? Jenkins asked. The prosecutor will file a second-degree murder charge. Given her confession and the circumstances, they might be able to get it reduced to manslaughter, but she's still looking at a long sentence. Jenkins was about to leave, but she stopped in the doorway. Detective, who do you think made that anonymous call? Bishop tapped his pen thoughtfully on the table. We may never know. But I think it was someone who saw the tension in the family and was really worried about Ashley. Ironic that that call could have saved her if it had come a day earlier. Left alone, Bishop went over the case files one more time. In front of him lay the last recovered fragment of Ashley's diary. Sometimes I think my mom will never understand my aspirations. But I'm thankful that I have R who believes in me. After art school, I can finally be free, be myself. I hope someday my mom will understand. Bishop closed the folder. Another tragedy born out of misunderstanding, fear, and jealousy. A family secret that had turned into a nightmare. In the morning, he would write a report, prepare documents for the prosecutor. But now, in the silence of the office, he allowed himself a moment of grief for a young life cut short so early and so senseless, for dreams that were never meant to come true, for talents the world would never see. The phone rang in his pocket. A new case, a new tragedy. The detective's life went on, as did the endless series of human stories in which he was only a temporary observer. Bishop got up, put on his jacket, and headed for the exit. Perhaps next time he would have time to prevent a disaster instead of just dealing with its aftermath. It was with that hope that he continued to work year after year, investigation after investigation. Sometimes it was the only thing that kept him going on the darkest days. Outside the window, dawn was beginning to break, promising a new day and perhaps a little more light after a long night.